I never believed in magic. Not until the morning I woke up and couldn't recognize my own reflection. But let me back up, because this story doesn't start with enchantments or mysterious potions. It starts with a garage sale, a cranky old woman, and the worst decision I ever made. My name is Robert Mitchell, though these days I'm not so sure that name fits anymore. I'm 62 years old, retired from a career in accounting that spanned nearly 4 decades. Married once, divorced twice, no kids. Just me, my golden retriever Max, and a 2-bedroom house in suburban Connecticut that always felt too quiet. My life had fallen into a comfortable rhythm. Morning coffee at 6, walk Max at 7, crossword puzzle by 8, and then the long stretch of afternoon where I'd putter around the house fixing things that didn't really need fixing. It was a Saturday in early October when everything changed. The kind of crisp autumn morning that makes you feel alive, with leaves crunching underfoot and that sharp smell of wood smoke drifting from someone's chimney. I was walking Max past the Henderson place when I noticed the handwritten sign taped to their mailbox. Estate sale. Everything must go. Now, I'm not usually one for estate sales. They always felt a bit morbid to me, picking through a dead person's belongings like vultures. But old Mrs. Henderson had passed away 3 weeks prior at the age of 97, and I'd known her slightly. She used to sit on her porch in the evenings, and we'd wave to each other. Sometimes she'd call out cryptic things that never quite made sense. Once she told me I had an unfinished face. Another time she said I was living in the wrong costume. I'd chalked it up to dementia and waved politely. The Henderson house looked different that morning. Where it had always seemed dark and shuttered, now the front door stood wide open and sunlight poured through the windows. Tables covered in odds and ends lined the driveway. I tied Max to the fence post and wandered over, not really looking for anything in particular. That's when I saw her. Not Mrs. Henderson, obviously, but her niece. Or maybe grandniece. A woman in her 40s with severe features and cold gray eyes that seemed to look right through you. She was sitting in a folding chair by the front door, smoking a cigarette and watching the handful of early bird shoppers with barely concealed contempt. I browsed through the usual estate sale fare. Chipped teacups, yellowed paperbacks, outdated electronics. Nothing interesting until I reached a card table near the back of the garage. It was covered in what looked like junk. Broken jewelry, rusty keys, a few tarnished picture frames. But sitting right in the center was a small wooden box about the size of a deck of cards. It was beautifully carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift when you looked at them from different angles. I picked it up. The wood felt warm in my hands, almost alive. When I opened the lid, I found a small glass vial filled with amber liquid and a folded piece of paper covered in spidery handwriting. That one's $50. I turned to find the niece standing directly behind me. How she'd moved so silently, I couldn't say. Up close, she smelled like cigarettes and something else. Something sour. $50? I laughed. For this little box? Her eyes narrowed. That belonged to my aunt's private collection. It's not for sale to just anyone. The way she said it made me want to buy it even more. I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I've always been contrary that way. Tell me I can't have something, and suddenly it's all I want. I'll give you 20. 45, and that's my final offer. We settled on 35, which was still ridiculous for what was probably just a trinket box. But there was something about it that called to me. The niece wrapped it in newspaper with movements that seemed almost reluctant, and as she handed it over, she looked me dead in the eye. She wanted you to have this, you know. I'm sorry. My aunt. In her final days, she kept talking about the man with the unfinished face. Said she'd made something special for him. I thought she was rambling, but when you picked up that box... She shook her head. Just be careful with what's inside. My aunt was into things she shouldn't have been into. Dark things. I wanted to laugh it off, but something in her expression stopped me. Instead, I thanked her, collected Max, and headed home with my mysterious purchase tucked under my arm. Back in my kitchen, I set the box on the table and really examined it for the first time. The carvings were even more intricate than I'd realized. They seemed to tell a story, though I couldn't quite make out what it was. Figures transforming, shapes shifting, boundaries dissolving. I opened the lid again and carefully unfolded the paper. The handwriting was difficult to decipher, but I managed to make out most of it. It read like instructions for some kind of ritual. Something about moonlight and intention and speaking words of transformation. At the bottom, in larger letters, was a warning. This spell is meant for Margaret Holloway and Margaret Holloway alone. The magic knows its intended recipient. To use it otherwise is to invite chaos. Margaret Holloway. The name meant nothing to me. I almost threw the whole thing in the trash right then. Almost. But that contrary streak kicked in again, along with curiosity. What harm could it do to read a few silly words? I didn't believe in magic anyway. That night, I waited until the moon was visible through my bedroom window. I'd poured the amber liquid into a small glass, and I held the paper in my other hand. Max was asleep at the foot of my bed, snoring peacefully. The words on the paper seemed to glow slightly in the moonlight, though that might have been my imagination. I read them aloud. They were in a language I didn't recognize, but somehow my mouth knew how to form the sounds. As I spoke, the amber liquid began to shimmer. When I finished the incantation, I lifted the glass to my lips and drank. It tasted like honey and copper and autumn leaves. The moment it touched my tongue, I felt something shift deep inside me. Not painful, exactly, but profoundly unsettling. Like someone had reached into my chest and rearranged my internal furniture. I waited. Nothing happened. I laughed at myself for being so foolish and went to bed. When I woke up the next morning, I knew immediately that something was wrong. My body felt different, lighter somehow, but also more present. I threw back the covers and looked down at myself, and that's when I started to panic. My chest had changed. Not dramatically, but noticeably. There was a softness there that hadn't existed before. My arms looked slimmer, my hands more delicate. I jumped out of bed and ran to the bathroom mirror. The face looking back at me was still mine, but not quite. The features had softened. My jawline was less pronounced, my lips fuller, my eyes larger. My hair, which had been short and gray, now fell past my shoulders in soft waves and had darkened to a rich chestnut brown. I looked like someone had taken my face and adjusted it, feminized it, made it into something I'd never seen before, but somehow recognized. I was still clearly me. If you knew Robert Mitchell, you'd see him in this reflection. But you'd also see something else. Someone else. Someone who'd been hiding underneath the whole time. I spent the rest of that day in a state of shock. I called in sick to a lunch appointment I had with my friend Gerald, claiming a stomach bug. I couldn't let anyone see me like this. What would I even say? How would I explain? But here's the strange thing. As the initial panic faded, I found myself looking in the mirror more and more. And each time I looked, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. A sense of rightness. Of completion. Like a puzzle piece had finally clicked into place. By evening, I'd made a decision. I needed to understand what had happened to me, and that meant finding out more about Mrs. Henderson and her mysterious niece. I grabbed my phone and started searching for information about the Henderson estate. What I found shocked me. Mrs. Henderson hadn't been just some eccentric old woman. She'd been known in certain circles as a practitioner of folk magic. A healer, a wise woman, someone people went to when conventional medicine failed them. There were forum posts and blog entries from people claiming she'd helped them with ailments both physical and spiritual. And there were darker rumors too. Whispers about transformations and curses and deals made in moonlight. I dug deeper and found references to Margaret Holloway. She'd been a friend of Mrs. Henderson's, apparently. Another woman in her 70s who'd lived 2 towns over. I found an obituary from 6 months ago. Margaret had died of cancer, leaving behind 2 grown children and a husband of 50 years. The obituary mentioned that Margaret had been a private person who struggled with identity issues throughout her life. Reading between the lines, I began to understand. Mrs. Henderson had made that spell for her friend. A friend who'd perhaps never felt comfortable in her own skin, who died before she could become who she was meant to be. And I'd drunk it instead. The next few days were a surreal blur. The changes to my body continued, though more subtly. My proportions shifted. My voice softened slightly. Even the way I moved felt different, more fluid somehow. But the physical changes were nothing compared to what was happening in my mind. Memories were surfacing. Not new memories, but old ones I'd buried so deep I'd forgotten they existed. Being 5 years old and trying on my mother's dresses when she wasn't home. Being 12 and feeling a sharp pang of envy watching my sister get ready for her first dance. Being 16 and lying awake at night wondering why I felt so disconnected from my own body. I'd pushed those feelings down for decades. Built a whole life on top of them. Married women thinking it would make me feel more masculine, more normal. Threw myself into my career, into being a provider, into playing the role everyone expected. And I'd been miserable in ways I'd never quite admitted to myself. The spell hadn't changed me. It had revealed me. But what was I supposed to do with this revelation? I was 62 years old. My life was already lived. You can't just start over at my age, can you? I spent a week hiding in my house, ordering groceries online, avoiding all human contact except for brief interactions with Max. I told Gerald I had the flu. I told my neighbor Agnes that I was dealing with a family emergency. Lies piled on top of lies. It was Max who finally forced me out of my paralysis. He needed to go to the vet for his annual checkup and I couldn't keep postponing. I had to face the world eventually. I stood in front of my closet for 20 minutes that morning, staring at my clothes. All of them felt wrong now. The button-down shirts, the khakis, the sensible loafers. They were Robert's clothes, and I wasn't sure I was Robert anymore. In the back of the closet, I found an old cardigan that had belonged to my second wife. She'd left it behind when she moved out 5 years ago, and I'd never gotten around to throwing it away. I put it on. It fit me now in a way it never would have before. I paired it with my most neutral pants and looked at myself in the mirror. Better. Not perfect, but better. At least I felt like I could breathe. The vet's office was busy that afternoon. I sat in the waiting room with Max at my feet, trying to make myself invisible. But people kept looking at me. Not hostile looks, just curious ones. Trying to figure me out. Was I a man? A woman? Something in between? Robert Mitchell? The vet tech was a young woman with bright pink hair and a kind smile. She did a double take when she saw me, but recovered quickly. Is that you, Mr. Mitchell? You look different. Did you do something with your hair? I touched my newly long locks self-consciously. Something like that. She led me back to the exam room, and I could feel her watching me with barely concealed curiosity. When the vet came in, Dr. Patricia Chen, she had the same reaction. But she was professional enough not to comment beyond a brief. New look suits you. The appointment went smoothly. Max was healthy. All his shots were up to date. As I was checking out at the front desk, the receptionist handed me a flyer. We're hosting a support group meeting here next Thursday evening. For pet owners dealing with major life transitions. Divorce, illness, that kind of thing. You might find it helpful. She said it casually, but her eyes were kind. Knowing. I took the flyer and thanked her, not sure if I'd ever have the courage to actually attend. But Thursday came, and I found myself back at the vet's office at 7 in the evening. The meeting was held in their community room, a space usually reserved for puppy training classes. About a dozen people sat in a circle of folding chairs. Some had brought their pets, others hadn't. I almost turned around and left. But then a woman near the door spotted me and waved me over. Come on in, sweetheart. Don't be shy. We're all friends here. Her name was Dorothy, and she was probably in her mid-70s. She had a face like a friendly bulldog and wore a sweatshirt with cats on it. She patted the empty chair next to her, and I sat down before I could talk myself out of it. The meeting started with introductions. People shared what they were going through. A man named Tom, whose wife had died 6 months ago. A woman named Sandra dealing with a cancer diagnosis. A younger guy named Marcus who'd recently come out as gay and was navigating family rejection. When it was my turn, I froze. What could I possibly say? That I'd accidentally drunk a magical potion meant for a dead woman and was now dealing with an identity crisis 6 decades in the making? I'm Robert. I finally managed. Or I was Robert. I'm not sure what I am anymore. I'm going through some changes, and I don't really know how to talk about them. Dorothy reached over and squeezed my hand. That's all right, honey. We've all been there. Changes are hard, especially the ones we don't see coming. After the meeting, several people came up to talk to me. Marcus was particularly kind. He told me about resources for people exploring their gender identity, regardless of age. He didn't assume anything about me, just offered information in case I needed it. It's never too late, he said. I know people who didn't come into their truth until their 70s or 80s. Life's too short to spend it being someone you're not. I drove home that night with my head spinning. The spell had forced me into this situation, but maybe it had also given me permission. Permission to explore parts of myself I'd locked away for fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of the unknown. Over the next few weeks, I started making small changes. I bought some new clothes from online retailers, things that felt more authentically me. Nothing too dramatic. Tunics and soft pants, a few flowing scarves. I started wearing the clothes around the house, getting used to how they felt. I also started researching. I read articles and watched videos about gender identity and expression. I learned terms I'd never heard before. Transgender, non-binary, gender fluid. I wasn't sure which, if any, applied to me. All I knew was that the person I saw in the mirror now felt more real than the person I'd been pretending to be for 6 decades. One evening, about a month after I'd drunk the potion, I was sitting at my computer when I got an email notification. It was from an address I didn't recognize, with a subject line that made my blood run cold. About the spell. I almost deleted it without opening, but curiosity won out again. The email was short and unsigned. Mr. Mitchell, I know what you did. My aunt's spell was not meant for you, and by taking it, you've created an imbalance. Magic always seeks equilibrium. What you've gained, someone else has lost. I suggest you find Margaret Holloway's family and make amends before the consequences become irreversible. You have been warned. My hands were shaking as I closed the laptop. What did that mean? What consequences? And how could I possibly make amends for drinking a potion meant for a woman who'd been dead for 6 months? I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I found myself going down a research rabbit hole. I found Margaret Holloway's obituary again and noted the names of her survivors. Her husband, Thomas Holloway. Her daughter, Patricia Holloway-Chin. Her son, David Holloway. Wait. Holloway-Chin. Dr. Patricia Chun. My veterinarian. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I'd been sitting across from Margaret's daughter, and she'd had no idea I'd stolen the transformation that was meant for her mother. But what was I supposed to do with this information? Walk into her office and confess. Hi, remember me? I accidentally drank a magical potion your grandmother made for your mom, and now I'm dealing with a gender identity crisis. Sorry about that. It sounded insane. It was insane. Yet the email had been clear. Make amends or face consequences. What kind of consequences, I couldn't imagine. But the thought of losing this newfound sense of self terrified me more than anything. The next morning, I made an appointment at Dr. Chen's clinic. Not for Max, but for a consultation about getting a cat. It was a flimsy excuse, but it got me in the door. Dr. Chen greeted me warmly when I arrived. Mr. Mitchell, good to see you again. I hear you're thinking about adopting a cat. We sat in her office, a small room lined with certificates and photos. I couldn't stop staring at the pictures. There was one of Dr. Chen as a teenager with an older couple who had to be her parents. The woman in the photo, Margaret Holloway, had kind eyes and a gentle smile. She looked like someone who'd spent her life caring for others. Mr. Mitchell? Are you all right? I realized Dr. Chen was watching me with concern. This was it. I had to tell her. But how? Dr. Chen, I need to tell you something, and you're going to think I've lost my mind. She settled back in her chair. I'm a veterinarian. I've heard a lot of strange things in my career. Try me. So I told her. Everything. The estate sale, the wooden box, the spell, the transformation. How I'd accidentally taken something meant for her mother. How I'd been living with the consequences ever since. To my surprise, she didn't laugh or call for security. She just sat there listening intently. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. You know about my mother's struggles, she finally said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. I read between the lines in her obituary. And I found some forum posts from people Mrs. Henderson had helped. I think your mother went to her looking for help with something she couldn't talk about openly. Dr. Chen's eyes filled with tears. My mother lived her entire life feeling like she was wearing someone else's skin. She told me once, near the end, that she'd always felt like she should have been born different. But in her generation, in her community, there was no way to explore those feelings. So she buried them, married my father, raised us kids, played the role everyone expected. And she died never getting to be herself, I said softly. Mrs. Henderson was making her a potion, something to help her, at least at the end, to give her a few weeks or months of feeling right in her own body before the cancer took her. But Mom died before it was ready. We sat in silence, both of us processing the weight of what had happened. I'd taken the gift that was meant to give a dying woman peace. And in doing so, I'd received a gift I hadn't even known I needed. I'm so sorry, I said finally. If I could undo it, if I could give it back to her. You can't, Dr. Chen interrupted gently. My mother is gone. The spell found its way to you, for a reason. Maybe the magic knew you needed it just as much as she did. But the email I got said there would be consequences. That I'd created an imbalance. Dr. Chen frowned. What email? I pulled out my phone and showed her. She read it, her frown deepening. That's from my cousin Heather, Mrs. Henderson's grandniece. She never approved of my mother's relationship with her great-aunt. Thought it was all nonsense and superstition. She's probably just trying to scare you. So, there's no magical imbalance? No consequences. I'm a scientist, Mr. Mitchell. I don't believe in magic. But I do believe in the power of truth. And the truth is, you've been given an opportunity. The question is, what are you going to do with it? That question haunted me for days. What was I going to do with this opportunity? I was 62 years old. Even with the physical changes the spell had brought, I was still an older person with an established life and identity. Could I really reinvent myself at this stage? I started attending the support group at Dr. Chen's office regularly. The people there became my lifeline. Dorothy, with her no-nonsense wisdom. Marcus, with his gentle encouragement. Even Tom, the widower, who was learning to rebuild his life from scratch. They didn't judge me for my confusion or my fear. They just accepted me as I was, wherever I was in my journey. And slowly, I started to accept myself too. I began introducing myself as Robin instead of Robert. It felt like a compromise at first, a name that could belong to anyone. But the more I used it, the more it felt like mine. Not Robert's name, not someone else's name. Mine. I started venturing out more. Coffee shops first, where no one knew me. Then the grocery store. The library. Each time got a little easier. People stared sometimes, sure. Some were rude. But most were indifferent or kind, and that was enough. 3 months after drinking the spell, I made a decision. I called my ex-wife, Jennifer, the one I'd actually remained on good terms with. We met for coffee, and I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. I always wondered, she said softly. There was always a part of you that seemed absent, like you were going through the motions but never fully present. I thought maybe you just didn't love me enough. But it wasn't about me at all, was it? No, I admitted. It was never about you. I didn't even know what it was about until recently. Are you happier now? I thought about it. Was I happier? I was certainly more confused, more vulnerable, more scared of what the future held. But underneath all of that, there was something else. Something that felt like peace. I think I'm more honest now, I said. And maybe that's a kind of happiness. Jennifer smiled. Then I'm happy for you. For Robin. Hearing her use my new name made something crack open in my chest. I hadn't realized how much I needed that acceptance from someone who'd known Robert. Word spread slowly through my small circle. Gerald, my lunch buddy, was confused at first, but ultimately supportive. Agnes, my neighbor, barely blinked. I've lived 83 years, she said. Nothing surprises me anymore. You do what makes you happy, dear. The hardest conversation was with my sister Ellen. She was younger than me by 5 years, but we'd never been particularly close. When I told her over the phone, there was a long silence. I don't understand, she finally said. You're saying you're a woman now? At 62. I'm saying I'm figuring out who I am. And that person doesn't fit neatly into the boxes I've been trying to squeeze into my whole life. Another silence. Then, do you remember when we were kids, and you used to sneak into my room and try on my clothes? I'd forgotten. Or maybe I'd just buried the memory so deep it had disappeared. I do now. Mom caught you once. I was maybe 10, so you would have been 15. She was so angry. She made you promise never to do it again, and you cried for hours in your room. I don't remember that part. I do. I remember thinking you looked happy in my clothes, and I didn't understand why that was bad. Why Mom was so upset. Ellen's voice cracked. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you then. I was just a kid, but still. I should have said something. Ellen, let me finish. I don't understand what you're going through. I probably never will. But you're my brother, my sibling, my family. And if this is what you need to be happy, then I support you. Okay. I was crying by the time she finished. Okay. Thank you. Besides, she added, her tone lightening slightly, you've always been the weird one in the family. Might as well lean into it. I laughed through my tears. As winter approached, I found myself thinking more and more about Margaret Holloway, the woman whose transformation I'd inadvertently stolen. I wanted to know her story, to understand who she'd been. Dr. Chen gave me her father's phone number. Thomas Holloway was 78 and living in a retirement community about an hour away. When I called and explained who I was and what I wanted, he agreed to meet me. The retirement community was one of those aggressively cheerful places with too bright paint and motivational posters everywhere. Thomas met me in the common room. He was a tall man, slightly stooped with age, with Margaret's same kind eyes. We sat in a quiet corner, and I told him my story. Like his daughter, he listened without judgment. Maggie always said there was magic in the world, he said when I finished. Real magic, not tricks or illusions. I was never sure if I believed her, but she believed it with her whole heart. Tell me about her, I said. Please. I feel like I need to know. Thomas smiled, a sad but genuine expression. Where do I start? Maggie was the most giving person I ever knew. She spent 30 years as a nurse, taking care of people. She raised 2 wonderful kids. She made the best apple pie you ever tasted. He paused. And she was miserable almost every day of her life. Because of her identity issues? That's part of it. But also because she never felt like she could talk about it. We were married 50 years, and it wasn't until the last few months that she finally told me the truth. That she'd always felt wrong in her own body. That she'd spent decades playing a role, being the wife and mother everyone expected, when inside, she felt like someone completely different. Were you angry when she told you? Angry? Thomas looked surprised. No. I was heartbroken that she'd suffered for so long without telling me. That she thought she had to hide such a fundamental part of herself from the person who loved her most in the world. He pulled out his wallet and showed me a photo. It was a picture of Margaret from their wedding day, young and beautiful in a white dress. But even in that moment of supposed happiness, there was something in her eyes. A distance. A sadness. She told me that if she could have one wish, it would be to live just one day as herself. As the person she was inside, Mrs. Henderson was trying to give her that gift. But Maggie died too soon. And I took it instead. No, Thomas said firmly. You received what she couldn't. And I think that would have made her happy. Maggie was always thinking of others. Even at the end, she was worried about me, about the kids, about everyone but herself. If she'd known her transformation could help someone else find their truth, she would have given it freely. We talked for another hour. He told me stories about Margaret's life, her love of gardening, her terrible singing voice that never stopped her from belting out hymns at church, her habit of rescuing stray animals, her kindness to everyone she met. By the time I left, I felt like I'd known her, and I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Margaret Holloway had spent her whole life living for others. The least I could do was honor her gift by living authentically. That winter was hard, not because of external judgment, though there was some of that, but because I was doing the internal work of dismantling a lifetime of pretense. Every day, I had to consciously choose to be Robin instead of defaulting to Robert. Every day, I had to challenge the voice in my head that said I was too old, too set in my ways, too ridiculous. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in gender identity issues. Her name was Dr. Sandra Walsh, and she was in her 60s herself. She helped me understand that identity isn't fixed, that people can discover new truths about themselves at any age, that there's no right or wrong way to be who you are. Society tells us we should have ourselves figured out by 25, she said during one session. But that's nonsense. We're always evolving, always becoming. Some people just take longer to shed the layers and find their core. I also joined an online support group for people exploring their gender identity later in life. I was surprised by how many of us there were. People in their 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s, all coming to terms with parts of themselves they'd suppressed for decades. Their stories gave me courage. The 78-year-old who started hormone therapy after her spouse died. The 65-year-old who came out as non-binary to his adult children. The 82-year-old who said she'd finally stopped caring what anyone thought and was living exactly as she pleased. If they could do it, so could I. Spring arrived with the subtle shift it always does in Connecticut. One day, everything was gray and frozen, and the next, crocuses were pushing up through the soil. I celebrated my 63rd birthday quietly, with just Max and a store-bought cake. But it felt significant somehow. A whole year as Robin. A whole year of becoming. Dr. Chen called me that week. "I have something for you," she said. "Can you come by the clinic?" When I arrived, she handed me a small box. Inside was a silver necklace with a delicate pendant. It was inscribed with words in the same strange language from the spell. "It was my mother's," Dr. Chen explained. "Mrs. Henderson gave it to her years ago." The inscription roughly translates to "be brave enough to bloom." Mom wore it every day under her clothes where no one could see it. "I think she'd want you to have it now." I put it on and it felt right, like a blessing and a reminder all at once. The summer of my 63rd year was the best summer I could remember. I spent it living fully as Robin. I stopped wearing my old clothes entirely and built a wardrobe that felt authentically mine. Nothing dramatic or stereotypically feminine. Just clothes that made me feel comfortable and true. I let my hair grow longer. I experimented with subtle makeup, learning through YouTube tutorials meant for older women. I changed my legal name to Robin Margaret Mitchell, keeping my original surname but embracing my new identity. The process wasn't easy. There was paperwork and bureaucracy. There were uncomfortable questions from bank tellers and DMV employees. But with each small step, I felt more solid in myself. Marcus from the support group became a good friend. He introduced me to his circle of queer elders, a wonderful group of people in their 60s and 70s who'd all found their truth later in life. They welcomed me with open arms and zero judgment. Dorothy, my friend from the vet support group, took me shopping for my first dress. I was terrified walking into the department store, but she held my hand the whole time. "You're never too old to try new things," she said firmly. "Anyone who says otherwise is a boring fool." I bought a simple blue dress that day. Nothing fancy, just a comfortable cotton shift. But when I wore it home, I caught my reflection in a store window and had to stop and stare. The person looking back at me was Robin. Fully Robin. And she looked happy. My ex-wife, Jennifer, invited me to a family barbecue that August. It was a big step, meeting her extended family as Robin for the first time. I almost backed out a dozen times. But Jennifer was insistent. "They're good people," she said. "And if they're not, then that's their problem, not yours." The barbecue was exactly as awkward as I'd feared for about the first 15 minutes. People stared. There were whispers. Jennifer's brother-in-law made an inappropriate joke that his wife immediately shut down. But then Jennifer's mother, a formidable woman in her 80s, pulled me aside. I knew Robert for 10 years when you two were married, she said. And I never saw him smile the way you're smiling now. Whatever you've done, whatever you've figured out, keep doing it. Life's too damn short to be miserable. She hugged me fiercely, and just like that, the tension broke. The rest of the afternoon was pleasant. People asked questions, mostly respectful ones. Some admitted they didn't fully understand, but they were trying. And that was enough. By fall, I'd settled into a new normal. I volunteered at the local library twice a week. I continued attending my support groups. I took Max on long walks through the changing leaves and felt more present in my life than I'd ever been. I also started writing. Just little things at first, journal entries about my journey. But then I started writing Margaret's story, or at least the story as I imagined it based on what her family had told me. It felt important to document it, to honor her. One October evening, exactly 1 year after I'd drunk the spell, I visited Mrs. Henderson's grave. It was in a small cemetery on the edge of town, shaded by old oak trees. Her headstone was simple: Eleanor Henderson, 1926 to 2024. She saw what others couldn't. I laid flowers on the grave and sat on the grass beside it. "Thank you," I said aloud. "I don't know if you meant for this to happen, if the magic knew what it was doing, or if it was all just chance. But thank you for giving me permission to be myself, even if it came in the strangest way possible." The wind rustled through the leaves, and I could have sworn I heard a voice whisper, "You're welcome, dear one." I visited Margaret's grave, too. Hers was in a larger cemetery, surrounded by other holloways going back generations. I brought apple blossoms, remembering Thomas's story about her pies. "I'm trying to live the way you would have wanted to," I told her. Authentically. Bravely. I hope that's enough. I hope wherever you are, you've found peace. A butterfly landed on her headstone, bright blue and impossibly delicate. It stayed for a long moment before flying away, and I chose to believe it was a sign. That winter, I made a decision. I was going to write a book about my experience. Not just for me, but for everyone else out there who felt like it was too late to become themselves. For the people hiding their truth because they thought they'd missed their window. I reached out to the people in my online support group and asked if I could share their stories too, with permission and anonymity. Almost everyone said yes. They wanted their experiences documented. They wanted other people to know they weren't alone. I spent the next 6 months writing. It was hard work, dredging up old memories and examining them honestly. There were days I cried. Days I wanted to give up. But I kept going, driven by the conviction that this story needed to be told. Dr. Walsh, my therapist, helped me work through the difficult parts. Dr. Chin provided medical and scientific context. Thomas shared more stories about Margaret. Ellen sent me old family photos that helped jog buried memories. By summer, I had a draft. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. I called it "The Spell Was Meant for Someone Else." Finding yourself when it's too late, except it never is. I sent it to a small publisher that specialized in memoir and LGBTQ stories. 3 months later, they accepted it. They wanted to publish it the following spring. I couldn't believe it. My story, Margaret's story, all of our stories, were going to be out in the world, available for anyone who needed them. The book launch was held at a local bookstore on a warm April evening. I was terrified walking in, sure that no one would come. But the room was packed. Jennifer was there with her family. Dr. Chin came with her father Thomas. Marcus brought friends from the queer elder community. Dorothy sat in the front row wearing a shirt that said, "I'm with Robin," with an arrow pointing sideways. Even Gerald showed up, looking uncomfortable but determined to be supportive. "I don't understand half of what you've been through," he admitted. "But you're my friend, and friends show up." I read a passage from the book, my voice shaking at first, but growing stronger. It was about the moment I first looked in the mirror after drinking the spell. About the fear and wonder and recognition I'd felt seeing my transformed face. When I finished, the audience applauded. Several people were crying. During the Q&A, a woman in her 70s raised her hand. "I've felt wrong my whole life," she said, her voice quavering. "But I thought I was too old to do anything about it. Your book makes me think maybe it's not too late." "It's never too late," I told her. And I meant it with every fiber of my being. After the event, people lined up to have their books signed. They told me their stories. So many people carrying secrets, living half-lives, afraid to bloom. I signed books until my hand cramped, and I didn't complain once. Thomas Holloway was one of the last in line. He handed me a book to sign, and when I opened it, I saw he'd tucked a photo inside. It was Margaret as a young woman, maybe 20 or so, looking at the camera with those same sad, distant eyes. "Thank you for remembering her," he said simply. "For making sure her story mattered." "Her story gave me mine," I replied. "I'll never forget that." I signed his book. For Margaret, who bloomed in the hearts of those who loved her. And for Thomas, who loved her enough to see her truly. With gratitude, Robin. The book did better than anyone expected. It wasn't a bestseller, but it found its audience. I started getting letters from people all over the country. People in their 60s and 70s and 80s saying they'd read my story and found the courage to start their own journeys. A woman wrote to say she'd come out as transgender at 72 after reading my book. A man wrote that he'd finally admitted to his wife of 40 years that he was gay. Another person wrote that they'd started exploring non-binary identity after suppressing it for 6 decades. Each letter felt like a gift. Proof that telling my truth had helped others find theirs. I started doing speaking engagements. Libraries, community centers, retirement homes. Anywhere people wanted to hear about finding yourself later in life. The audiences were always mixed. Some older people exploring their own identities. Some younger people trying to understand their parents or grandparents. Some just curious. I told them about the spell, about Margaret, about the long journey from Robert to Robin. But mostly, I told them that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. That life doesn't end at 40 or 50 or 60. That there's always time to bloom, if you're brave enough. During one talk at a retirement community in Massachusetts, a woman in her 80s approached me afterward. She was tiny and frail, but her eyes were sharp. "I spent my whole life being who everyone else needed me to be," she said. Wife, mother, grandmother. I was good at those roles. But they were never the whole story. "What was the whole story?" I asked gently. She smiled. "I'm not sure yet, but I'm finally going to find out. Better late than never, right?" Better late than never, I agreed. My 65th birthday arrived with surprising speed. I celebrated with a party at my house. All my found family was there. Jennifer and her kids. Dr. Chun and her father. Marcus and the queer elder community. Dorothy. Gerald. Ellen and her family, who'd flown in from California. We ate too much cake. We told stories. We laughed until we cried. At one point, looking around the room at all these people who loved and accepted me exactly as I was, I felt overwhelmingly grateful. The spell was meant for someone else. That much was true. But somehow, through magic or fate or simple chance, it had found its way to me. And in receiving Margaret's gift, I'd learned to give myself permission to exist fully. Not as Robert, not as someone else's idea of who I should be, but as Robin. Messy, confused, still figuring it out Robin. Ellen pulled me aside as the party was winding down. "I'm proud of you," she said, "for being brave enough to live your truth. Even though it took me 6 decades to find it. Especially because it took you 6 decades. That makes it even braver." That night, after everyone had gone home and I was cleaning up with Max at my feet, I looked at my reflection in the dark window. The face looking back was 65 years old. It had lines and wrinkles and gray hairs that no spell could erase. But it was my face. Robin's face. And for the first time in my life, I was at peace with the person I saw. The spell was meant for someone else. But it found me anyway. And in the end, maybe that was its own kind of magic. The magic of second chances. Of late bloomings. Of finally becoming real. I still think about Mrs. Henderson sometimes. About her sitting on her porch in the evenings, seeing things others couldn't. Had she known I would walk by her house that October morning? Had she known I would be drawn to that little wooden box? Had the magic orchestrated the whole thing? Or was it simply an accident that turned out to be exactly what was needed? I'll never know for certain. But I choose to believe there was purpose in it. That Margaret's transformation, denied to her in life, was passed on to someone who needed it just as much. That in the grand web of connection and coincidence we call life, sometimes gifts find their way to the right people even when they're addressed to someone else. I'm Robin Margaret Mitchell. I'm 65 years old. I spent the first 62 years of my life pretending to be someone I wasn't, and I'm spending however many years I have left being exactly who I am. It's messy and complicated and imperfect, but it's mine. And that's enough. The spell is meant for someone else, but it saved me anyway. And if my story can save even one person from a lifetime of hiding, then everything I've been through will have been worth it. Every moment of fear, every difficult conversation, every uncertain step into unknown territory. We bloom on our own schedules. Some people know who they are from childhood. Others take decades to figure it out. Neither path is wrong. Neither path is better. We all get there in our own time, and the only tragedy is never getting there at all. So if you're reading this and you're afraid it's too late, let me tell you something. It's not. It's never too late. The spell might not find you the way it found me. You might not wake up one morning transformed, but you can transform yourself, one small brave choice at a time. Start with honesty, with yourself first, then with others you trust. Start with small steps. A new name that feels right. Clothes that make you comfortable. Communities where you can explore safely. And give yourself grace. You're learning to be yourself after years of being someone else. That takes time. That takes courage. That takes patience. But you can do it. I did it at 62, and I'm still doing it now. Every day is a choice to be Robin instead of Robert. Some days it's easy. Some days it's hard. But it's always worth it. The spell is meant for someone else. But maybe, in a way, it was also meant for me. Meant for all of us who spent too long hiding, too long afraid, too long playing roles we'd outgrown. It's never too late to step into the light. Never too late to bloom. Never too late to become who you were always meant to be. And if you need proof, look at me. Look at Margaret's story, living on through mine. Look at all the people who've found courage through telling their truths. We're all spells that found their way to unexpected places. We're all transformations that came later than expected, but right on time. Be brave enough to bloom. That's what Margaret's necklace says, and it's what I try to live by every single day. Sometimes bravery looks like grand gestures. Other times it looks like simply getting out of bed and being yourself for one more day. Both kinds of bravery matter. Both kinds count. The spell was meant for someone else. But it taught me that magic isn't just in the extraordinary transformations. It's in the daily choice to be authentic. In the courage to let go of who you thought you should be and embrace who you actually are. In the community you build with other people brave enough to do the same. I'm 65 years old. I'm Robin. And my life finally feels like my own. That's the best magic of all.